Today we are discussing India's participation at the recent G7 summit. We had Prime Minister Narendra Modi in Germany where he met the G7 leaders along with the other world leaders, and the Prime Minister discussed a number of issues with them. Ambassador Parthasarathi, when we see this particular G7 summit, the focus seems to have been on the Ukraine crisis and also on Russia and the sanctions that the West wants to proceed, further sanctions on Russia. And we also seen that India's stand on the Ukraine crisis has been more nuanced than the Western world. How do you think this G7 summit also helps India and the Prime Minister to put across India's viewpoint to the world?
India's viewpoint to the world on Ukraine is very well known, and the Prime Minister has repeatedly said it that this has to be settled peacefully by direct discussions between the Russians and the Ukrainians. But the main meeting of our hosts was directed to this. The G7 more or less takes up a Western agenda because its members range from Canada and US to France, Germany, and Britain from Europe, and then on to Japan. They're all Western allies. So the discussions on developments in Ukraine were held by them. They passed their resolutions. And they know quite well what our position is. So the interesting point is that despite their knowing, they had invited us. Now, the fact of the matter is our relations with Germany have always been very good. The amount of economic assistance that we get from Germany is huge. Not that we ask for it, but they provide it, and in very good terms. So they have a particularly high regard for India. We had long discussions with Germany, with whom we have good relations. And we made our proposals quite clear because the discussion was broader. And we made our proposals quite clear that it did not focus on Ukraine, but largely on the question of the economic problems confronting us and environment. We pointed out to the developed countries, and they were all there sitting and listening to the Prime Minister, that look, we have 17% of the world's population, yet pollution from India is barely 5% of the world. Therefore, we will have to do something about it, and the message was very clear to the developed countries that we expect a contribution to them. So on the whole, the Prime Minister came across very clearly on India's views on these pressing issues, environment. And I think one of the important developments which came was a move by the Americans to raise $500 billion for assisting developing countries primarily in their infrastructure. So that was really the Western powers' answer to the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative in Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and so on.
Mr. Parthasarathi, as you pointed out, we have seen this interesting development where the US has come forward with infrastructure assistance, or we can say it will be a kind of an investment in infrastructure in various nations. Do you feel that this is also somewhere pushing back at China's ambitious, the Belt Road Initiative, and we are seeing these investments across the world which China is making today? Do you feel that for the G7, China is always that elephant in the room which it needs to confront?
Well, there is mixed views on China because even amongst the Americans, you have no dearth of people who are very fond of the Chinese and want to do business. But by and large, there is a wide consensus on China. But coming back to what we have said, the fact of the matter is that we have been pushing for this. And we have been pointing out that from the Chinese projects under that so-called Belt and Road Initiative, Sri Lanka has been driven bankrupt. And this is happening to countries in Africa also. And even the Pakistanis, they are finding the Chinese are very hard when it comes to repayments.
Ambassador Parthasarathi, we also see that the Foreign Secretary has said that Prime Minister Modi, he spoke with world leaders on several issues. And the PM had also appealed earlier to both Russia and Ukraine for peace and an end to hostilities. And as the Foreign Secretary spelled out at the G7 summit, this is a position that the Prime Minister has reiterated, that there must be an immediate end to the hostilities. Do you feel that the world, especially the Western world, is more understanding today of India's nuances when it comes to its foreign policy position? Also given the sense that India is in the regional equation, one of the few countries that can actually stand up and push back China, if we look at the regional equation. So maybe that lends the West a greater understanding of India's positions.
Certainly. If President Biden were left to listening to his advisors, then it would have been difficult. But the fact of the matter is that now even in the US, Biden and others are coming around to the view that they have to do business with India. And you saw the Biden reaching out to the Prime Minister. So the PM has played it firm. He says, I am not going to change my view and join you people in condemning Russia for what? Our effort should be to get them to sit down together and to resolve it peacefully.
Ambassador Parthasarathy, the Foreign Secretary, while briefing and answering questions, also highlighted that the Prime Minister has spoken with world leaders on the knockdown effect of the conflict in Eastern Europe on the food security crisis, especially in the vulnerable countries. And this is something which we've been talking about, the global food security, the hunger, and generally the food crisis, which seems to also be emerging as one of the outcomes of the Ukraine crisis. How do you think India can contribute in this matter, and also this helps India then establish itself as a world leader when it comes to global food security?
You see, let's say two things which the external affairs ministers referred to. One is energy, and they wanted us to have no cooperation with Russia and all that. And then we pointed out that the largest buyers of Russian gas, even today, are NATO member states. So that is the point we've made, and we've made it very clear that on these matters we will be guided by our national interests. Taking it further, we will have to see how it goes, because I think they have come to understand that even their own writers are saying they're playing a double game. You can't ask India, as they asked us to, curb our relations with Russia and not buy oil from them when we are getting it on a discount.
We've also seen this picture which has gone pretty viral, and that is of President Biden walking up to PM Modi and they're talking with the Canadian Prime Minister. Do you feel that even though India is not formally a member of the G7 countries, the fact that India is invited and Prime Minister Modi is there among the world leaders also assures India of a place at the world stage where India is today looked upon as one of the emerging world powers?
No, the real success was G20. G20 is a permanent forum. So I think India's economic stature was established then. What is important now is that what we are offering amidst this pandemic are serious proposals, our readiness to expand production of vaccines in India, distribute it across Asia. So I think the working with the Americans and others like-minded like the Japanese in the Asia-Pacific region, or the Indo-Pacific region as it is called, has helped India to now have a standing and image, not just in the subcontinent. You take our West, in recent years, see how the relations with the Gulf countries have improved. Today's Prime Minister is in the United Arab Emirates. Do you know the Indians living there remit back more than $10 billion? So we have now developed, I think, or in the process of developing, not just looking in the subcontinent, but extending across the Indian Ocean and into the Pacific. You are getting an Indian position and presence in a role. And in the case of Quad, which the Prime Minister has just met with, the same thing applies. We discussed not only security, but also development.
Mr. Parthasarathy, another interesting thing that we saw at the G7 summit, and this is India's soft power at display, we saw the gifts that the Prime Minister carried for the world leaders. We had a Gulabi Meenakari brooch, cufflinks, black pottery, a platinum hand-painted tea set, a Zari Zardosi box. These were some of the specialized items that the Prime Minister has gifted to leaders of the G7 summit. And interestingly, all these gifts were made in UP under the One District, One Product scheme. How do you see this initiative? It's like putting India's local products and India's own soft power in a very soft manner, let me put it, when you give gifts which are so traditionally India.
No, I think what is traditionally India is well known. And let me say, when I have served abroad, sadly, the marketing of our handicrafts needs to improve. The Prime Minister has drawn the attention of the world. It's now for us and the people concerned, the businesses concerned, to take this up. Because these are India's treasures. And India is a unique civilization. We are not just a country, we are a civilization. This is a fact we seem to forget. Mahatma Ji always said this. हमारी संस्कृति है, सिर्फ सभ्यता ही नहीं. So I think we need to build on Indian handicrafts, and the Prime Minister has set the example. I hope the private sector follows through, which is what they should be doing, because missions abroad, I know, have been told repeatedly to encourage handicrafts.
And with these comments, we bring today's discussion to an end. Thank you.